Hi everyone and welcome back to Rachel's Enchanting Cakes. For today's tutorial I'm going to be showing you these beautiful piping techniques for beginners, as well as how to make a number shaped cake without needing a shaped cake tin or wasting too much cake. There is a way to do it and I keep it very simple. This one is excellent for if you are a beginner baker. I'm going to guide you through everything step by step, and let's make a start. Happy baking everyone. So to create the shape you want to cut out 3 strips of baking paper. Now you can do this for any shape or number. You then simply place them directly onto your cake card into the shape required. I'm going to use these as a guide when cutting the cake. All I did was draw around those separate pieces of baking paper to cut out the shape I needed. These can be made in any size. Now, we need some cake. So I'm using sheet cake. You can just bake large square cakes. Now, if I was to place this directly over the sheet cake, we would be wasting so much cake, it would be unreal. So instead of doing it that way, think of those pieces of baking paper. We are going to use strips of cake instead. You can see it working here. So all I did then was cut out 4 strips of cake. I want my cake to be 2 layers. I've worked out I need 2 strips roughly for the base and then 2 strips for the top layer. Assembling the cake, start by adding a glue, so some buttercream I am using here, directly to the cake board. You then want to take your first strip of cake, place this directly over your cake board, take the piece of baking paper and place it on top, and use this as a guide so you know where to cut at the top. We're now going to add more cake. Here I have added more buttercream, and then the strip that we have just cut, there is a small amount of cut off. So we don't waste any more, I simply place this on this section and then cut it into shape. I am now using a fresh strip of cake, however I've cut it down just to avoid parts breaking. I simply place this directly onto the cake board, again covered in buttercream and stuck to the cake that's already on there with some buttercream. And then using that piece of baking paper that we had for the base, simply place this on top to use as a guide so you're able to cut it. Tip: to help keep the cake fresh, if you add a crumb coat to the centre just before you add the final piece, this will protect the sponge from the air. It will allow it to last longer before it goes dry. So for the angled piece, start by placing it on the piece of baking paper and lining it up. Then you can see where the cake actually needs to be cut. So for this, I simply use a pencil and I just draw, and then I bend the piece of baking paper so that I am able to cut the cake exactly. I then simply place my cut down strip of cake directly onto the number 4 drum, and there we have it. That's our base layer. You would simply repeat that for the top layer, but I'm going to show you how to securely fill this with jam and buttercream, and then we're going to get straight onto that beautiful piping decoration. Start by covering your cake with a layer of buttercream, but be sure to add the lines. You see here, these are going to be weak points that I don't want jam to leak through, so we are going to cover them with extra buttercream. Now, using a piping tip 2A, it's a simple round tip. You want to start piping around the edges of the cake, and I also fill in some of those gaps. Now this is just going to make the cake look more pretty, if you like, from the sides. A lot of people who do number cakes do not crumb coat the sides of the cake. Now that's fine, but as mentioned, if you need to place this in a fridge because it is hot weather, the cake will dry out an awful lot faster if it doesn't have any sort of protection on it. so the butter actually prevents the cake from drying out. So I've made mine a bit of a semi-naked cake around the sides. However, I want the inside to look really pretty as well. There is a way to do this and still add loads of jam without it leaking. So this is the first part you need to do, just to make it look pretty. It's a very simple squeeze and pull away with the piping bag. And then I'm going to show you the next part before we fill this with jam and add the rest of the cake. What I then do, using just a piping bag with the end cut off, I first of all fill in those lines. That will prevent the jam from leaking through. This is just basically creating a well like you would on a normal shaped cake. But where I've put that lovely detail on the outside, I also reinforce that edge with more of a well. And you'll notice on the right bottom side, that section of the number 4, it's a bit silly placing jam in there because there would be risk of a leak. So I do this just to prevent that. So if you're using a jam, use one of your choice and then simply fill in all of these gaps. We've got our lovely safe well. I would recommend refrigerating the cake first, just to allow that buttercream to set slightly before you do this. And then we will be refrigerating it again once we've added another layer of buttercream to the top of this jam, just to make the cake more stable. So again, just using a piping bag with the end cut off, that's how I like to cover the top layer of jam with buttercream. It's less messy, and then I very carefully use a knife and gently spread this out. I'm going to now place this in a fridge for about 30 minutes to allow this buttercream to set before adding the top layer of cake and giving it a final crumb coat. For the top layer of cake, again, I've just used the pieces of baking paper. Now, because they're all the correct shape and we've got it spot on the first time, it's a lot easier to cut down. You then just want to place this directly on top of your set buttercream, as you can see here, and we have the perfect number 4 shape. Simply cover the top of this cake and the top sides. Be careful not to get any in the centre because we want that beautiful piping technique to come through, with some buttercream to protect it. Chill the cake again, and now we're going to place it on a covered cake drum. Because this cake is chilled, it's less risk of damage, and I simply pick it up and place it directly onto a 14-inch square cake drum covered in fondant. We're now going to start those beautiful rosettes, ruffles, and all of those other lovely piping techniques on the top. So to pipe those flowers, I have some disposable piping bags, a Wilton 125 piping nozzle. I use that for the ruffles. A Wilton 4B, that gives you more like a shell effect, but it's really simple and easy to use. The Wilton 2D, which you will know for roses and rosettes. And finally, the Wilton 2A, which we have already used for the centre. The colours I have are sky blue, pink and grape violet. Quick tip, for a two-toned flower, simply place one colour on the outer edge of the piping bag, whilst your other colour goes directly into the centre. The only two-toned flowers I'm having on this cake are the actual roses in blue and white and pink and white. Starting with the Wilton 2D piping nozzle, we're going to pipe these beautiful rosettes. Simply squeeze the piping bag and move around in a circular motion, and then you want to just pull away or flick away. Place these randomly all over the top of your cake. It's a beautiful effect and easy to achieve. We then move on to the Wilton 4B piping nozzle. This is what is a bit like a shell-like effect. It's one of my favourites and it's very simple to use. Simply squeeze the piping bag whilst gently pulling away. Again, do this randomly all over the tops of your cake. Moving on to the Wilton 125 nozzle. This is a simple teardrop shape. You want the large end of the teardrop touching your chilled cake and the thin end facing the top. Whilst piping, simply do a left to right motion, gently squeezing the piping bag, and once complete, simply stop squeezing and pull away. This will leave you with a beautiful ruffle effect. Again, do this randomly all over the cake. I'm now back to using the Wilton 2D nozzle, but in a different colour, pink and white. I start with a few rosettes, but then you can also create a hydrangea. Simply squeeze the piping bag and pull away for the hydrangea. And for the rosettes, you want to start squeezing in the centre, go around in a circular motion, and then simply pull away. So this is just a speeded up version of me covering the cake with the same piping nozzle. Finally, using the 2A piping tip, so that's just a simple round tip, I just add some finishing touches. You then want to fill in these gaps, so I do create a few more hydrangeas using the 2D piping nozzle, but in blue and white, just to add a little more colour. And there we have it, guys. That's our finished number shaped cake with some really basic piping techniques on top, but just how effective is this? If you hate fondant covered cakes, this is the cake for you. Happy baking, everyone. I really do hope I've helped you again today, and I'll be back soon with more new, completely free content.